Okay, now we are complete up here, so we'll get started. Sorry for the delay. It's actually 10:05 here. I'll call the meeting to order. We've got a new person at the table with us, and so maybe we could start with a little introduction, if you could, please.
Thank you. I'm Kate Fisher. I'm here representing the Yurok tribe.
Well, welcome, Kate. Thank you. We just quick orientation, if you haven't seen everything we've been doing. We decided in the beginning to kind of work through consensus, and so we just kind of bring up the issues one at a time, sometimes a couple at a time, but just really discuss them, talk them through, and kind of get everybody's general buy-in and compromising and all that at the same time, and finish with a game plan or a decision without formal voting and all that. So that's been our process, and it's been working really well. A lot of compromising in both directions from everybody. So we welcome you to the table. So we've got a full house, more folks here in the audience, so welcome. Again, my name's Blake Alexander, and we've got an agenda here with about 4 or 5 items on it, and I'll just briefly run through this. We're going to continue our discussion on the manufacturing and processing piece. Then we're going to potentially get into cultivation of cannabis, and after that would be distribution. So public comment is then listed as item 4, and adjourn as 5. We welcome public comment kind of at any point, because we're going to be on subject here, starting with this manufacturing and processing, and so I guess I would just somehow recognize you, wave at me, whatever you want, and we can kind of break at any point and accept public comment, especially if it's pertinent to what we're currently discussing. We don't really have a formal rules on that, right? So public comment is just come up, give us your name and who you are and your point, especially if you think it's pertinent to what we're discussing, and then we'll fit that in when appropriate.
But please come to the mic so that it can
Yeah.
be heard throughout the whole system.
Yeah, all these meetings are being recorded, and that's why we're using the mics. If you're not talking into a mic, then it's a lot of dead quiet time on the recording. So with that, we're going to just pick up a quick summary of where we were last meeting. We've been meeting every 2 weeks, and we're going to continue meeting every 2 weeks in the big picture, trying to help the county come up with an ordinance that is represented from all of us, participating from pros and cons and different perspectives. And hopefully we are handing something to the Board of Supervisors that can then be adopted, knowing that it's been vetted through the public process and all sides have already been considered. So that's kind of our goal, is just trying to give them a finished product, not a work in progress. We don't want to give them a range of taxes. We want to say, go tax it at this rate. That would be ideal. It's not what we did, but that would be ideal. So that's just an example. So last time we talked about setback zones and things in the community in regards to different parks and churches and schools and things. We've worked on that a lot. We also talked about the manufacturing and the processing that we're going to continue, and in regards to what zones of commercial development zones should be included in or allowed in that regard. And then we talked about different setbacks and the different stages and potential limits for setbacks and growing sizes. So with that, let's just pick up right where we left off with what is today's item number 1, which is manufacturing and processing. And if anyone would like to give a better, more in-depth summary of where we are and then what needs to be gone over, now's the time.
Yeah, I think you did a pretty good job of summing it up. I think we We just kind of barely touched on cultivation outdoor, and we talked a little bit more about manufacturing and processing because they're potentially in locations that are similar to locations we've been looking at for retail.
So if we had to ask a question, what do we need to decide what's left on manufacturing? Manufacturing and processing are certainly something that if we build it too large, they will come. If we build it just right, they will come. If we build it just to take care of our county and our demands and our supposed or projected I guess, quantity, right? So what I was talking about a few minutes ago with someone was that, this is one of the areas that I think we need to be extra cautious on, not to make it too attractive to super large business outside coming in. However, I'm not anti-capitalism and I'm not anti-growth, and so we have to be aware that we just need to play this hand correctly and continue to talk it through. So that's what I'm encouraging here.
I agree. Sounds good.
All right.
I want to know what's the reason why you wouldn't want to see manufacturing and processing at a larger scale than what our county could support with product? What's the worry? Because when I look at it, I see that this is the one portion of this industry that has absolutely no effect on the community per se. It's not more sales. It's not putting the product out there for kids and people to buy at a retail facility. It's not a whole bunch more growth of, what I mean by growth, I mean cultivation. It's not a bunch of property used as cultivation. It's simply a businessman or woman choosing to create a facility that is going to then maybe potentially, and we have no control. I mean, technically, if we allow one processing facility, it could be that all of the product that goes to that processing facility is not from Del Norte County. It could be all coming in to be done there. There's a lot of potential benefits to running processing or manufacturing business in this county that could be better than other counties in the state of California. There are some businesses that have moved here because of the county benefits to their manufacturing business. And so I fail to grasp what is the danger, I guess, to putting larger manufacturing and processing buildings and facilities in this county. It seems like it's just potential jobs.
Great question, and I'm not here arguing too adamantly against that. I'm just suggesting that let's back up from this and look at it. What I don't want to see is a pie-in-the-sky vision of it's all going to be great and it's all going to be a net positive on the community. And let's just pretend it's a manufacturing of anything, right? It could be any agriculture product. It could be making chairs. It could be making widgets. We don't necessarily need 1,000 employee facility, right? 100 employee facility would be a stretch, and that would be wonderful if we could get to that, something like that. So that's kind of the range and what's in my head in terms of the downside that I see is a big empty facility that didn't work. And so I would like to see it grow appropriately sized for our community and grow from there. And that's all I'm adding.
I think last time some of our questions, if I have them written down right, were non-volatile. We don't want any kind of gases used or...
Right, and the definitions of those.
Right, and 10,000 square footage is one thing we had talked about to be the larger size of a manufacturing, but there was really no reasoning behind that. It was just a cap on square footage. Hours of operations, so that they didn't operate 24 hours a day in the countryside somewhere and disturb an existing environment. And I think it was just
Consider C2 and C3.
C4 and manufacturing is what we talked about, and considering 2 and 3. And Heidi was getting some pictures or something to kind of show us what that looked like in the county.
And then, you won't, go ahead, Robert.
You know, I kind of come at it from a little bit of the opposite spectrum of trying to see how we can craft this to foster a kind of job we'd want to see here. You know, most of my time up here I've spent as an hourly wage earner, and so I'd like to see more opportunities, you know, for competition for an hourly wage earner. You know, we emphasize tourism a lot, and you know, for me as an hourly wage earner, that meant usually just working during the parade, working during the fireworks show, and that kind of thing, you know, the times. And so I'd like to see, as, you know, especially with edibles, you know, I don't, you know, pie in the sky it might be, but to me that means an expiration date, and it means someone has to manufacture this product year-round to have a consistently fresh product, and it means a year-round job. And you know, we've talked about the taxation. I think Oakland's 5% for medical and 10% for recreational. So even if our taxes pass that we have on the ballot for manufacturing, I see an opportunity to attract, you know, the opposite, I think, of what Mr. Alexander's kind of saying, you know, to attract, you know, maybe an employer that could provide a job. And I don't think it would interfere so much with, it might complement what, you know, we're trying to foster with small local cultivation kind of thing, and small local retail. I think the manufacturing would help consume some of the, especially with edibles and that sort of thing, consume some of the raw products that little Del Norte farmers and the surrounding counties farmers could consume. And I could see Del Norte being a place where, you know, the industry kind of might take hold, you know, post-federal restrictions, you know, when we have interstate transportation, you know, we have the Illinois Valley and Humboldt County, and it, you know, I would love to see us kind of go the opposite direction and maybe pick something that's going to provide the best job. Maybe extraction's not it, because maybe it's 2 or 3 times a year that you're getting seasonal work, you know, but maybe manufacturing a product with an expiration date on it is kind of a way of seeing that you know, the industry that we encourage here is something that's doing something that I don't think anything's done for this community since, you know, timber and fishing's gone down, and that's, you know, try to emphasize someone who would like just a year-round decent job.
Yeah, I favor some sort of restriction of scale, but maybe for a different reason. We'll put a little different spin on it. My concern with all the cannabis licenses is the effect it has on real estate pricing and speculation in the real estate market. And it's already been proven. It's caused a lot of problems in other communities where it started first. Now, the effect of it's lessening because of the market of, it's not as a high value product anymore. It's not the hot item it used to be, but it is still negatively influencing real estate markets in places where it starts anew. And I don't think that, you know, real estate speculative bubbles are damaging to communities, and I think Del Norte's especially vulnerable to that. And so I think that should be a major consideration for the reasons why we would limit scale of individual operations. If you invite a lot of big money in, it really does displace the opportunities for people who don't have a lot of money to get into business. It drives up lease prices. It eliminates prospective areas. We don't have a lot of areas here that will be suitable. I don't know the logistics of how to pull that off, but I'd like to lean in that direction in terms of protecting, you know, our real estate markets and access by locals who don't necessarily have money, especially since there isn't access to lending and funding yet in this industry.
Okay, very good. Robert, good points. I agree with the year-round concept. If we can supply that kind of jobs, or if we can do things at this level to encourage that to happen, then I'm all for it. That's where I'm coming from. I don't mean, I'm not just here to be anti. I'm here to try to put some common sense to it and set realistic goals. So, any other comments? Kate?
What does the existing zoning allow for space? Because if you can work within the constraints of where you're already zoned for manufacturing and commercial, then that can set up a boundary for you. The other thing I'd say is you probably want to look at an economic analysis as to what can be supported. The infrastructure to support transportation in and out, except by air, and even by air, is difficult here.
Yeah. Who would like to answer the current status? Heidi?
I believe I can answer the zoning aspect of it. I mean, we set a minimum lot size for new lot creation.
We should listen to the full
But as
song.
far as the size of, if someone were to build a new building, we don't restrict it. I mean, we have, maximum lot coverage and those types of aspects. I mean, we would address whatever the impacts would be of the development as part of the environmental review for the project.
So it's fair to say that there's nowhere to look in the current zoning to get limitations of any kind.
That's correct.
Other than what zoning itself, like what we were use,
Yeah.
was it C1 we were talking about the other day? You were talking about the last meeting.
No, I think we were looking at
C4, yeah.
C4 and manufacturing. Those would be our heaviest type of zone designations for manufacturing activities.
So Kurt, why don't you comment, you missed last time's meeting, and so we were in the 10,000 square foot range of manufacturing floor space. What's your opinion, or how do you feel about that?
Personally, I do not believe that limiting manufacturing or processing in any form is beneficial for this community. Like I said, I was just mentioning, these are the two processes by which don't interject cannabis into our community. It's simply and solely a job opportunity. These entities that we would be talking about processing and manufacturing, they're not selling product necessarily to local stores, and we are talking about restricting local stores. So the avenue which they would present product to the community or gain product from the community through cultivation is already going to be mitigated in other ways. And so this is just solely a job thing. I don't know of any other industry I'm trying to think of that you would limit sizing as far as what size of building you could use or size of facility you could conduct your business in. I hear speaking about hours of operations. I would wonder what other businesses this county limits hours of operation under. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on the whole manufacturing and processing thing. I like I get the idea of limiting stores and all that jazz, and limiting cultivation potentially sizes, because those are the avenues by which this product is made and placed into the community. But these two are it's just a job thing for me. And I would welcome more entrepreneurs that wanted to come in and try to create a business and try to create jobs for our community. And I don't see a reason why we as a county should be limiting that.
I tend to agree with Kurt in the respect of limiting the manufacturing and processing, because I believe in that same respect that it is one of the innocuous aspects of the industry, that I don't know, what that type of effect would have on the open community aspect of it. But I do share some of Jesse's concerns with the speculative real estate pricing that is in relation to manufacturing and processing. It is one of the it's one of the drivers of the increase in property values in the majority of the jurisdictions in most of the states that have a legal framework. So that would be my concern. I truthfully don't know how we get to, managing real estate prices from our perspective. That's kind of something that, the public pretty much dictates. If somebody's willing to pay a price for something, then it's usually what that price is set at. So I think we've got a lot of discussion to see how we can get to a consensus about limiting. But I do kind of share some of Kurt's opinions on that.
I just want to add too that, I have a lot of experience in the ag community, as most of us up here do. The biggest limiting factor that I can see for agricultural, any type of production, processing, manufacturing, is transportation. That is the biggest limiting factor for, no pun intended, green product. And green product meaning product that hasn't been processed. So you're shipping water weight, you're shipping, you know, quote-unquote garbage, you're shipping stem and leaf. So that in itself is going to be the biggest limiting factor for these processing plants, let's say, that would maybe potentially be placed in Del Norte County, because you would have to be shipping green product in from other counties, and the shipping cost in itself would limit these businesses in that respect. And so, you know, absolutely shipping is going to be the biggest issue with our localized area, particularly because there's only one way in and one way out, and we're at the very end of the spectrum, and everything that ships from here has to go the furthest distance per se.
I'd say shipping is, compared to other agricultural industries, the cannabis industry, the shipping is pretty inconsequential, honestly. Even when you're talking about shipping bulk material, you're probably rarely going to be shipping stems and trash, because the state taxes you so heavily by the ounce on all the material that you move between licenses. So definitely if you're shipping hay and you're shipping livestock and, you know, pallets of, you know, truckloads of fertilizer and things like that, shipping's an issue, but shipping's probably not as big an issue with cannabis. And it's definitely a special industry. So if we were going to treat it like any other industry, then we wouldn't need this panel. I don't think it would just fit into the zoning. Planning Commission would take care of it or whatever. So it's a totally different industry. So we can't say, well, I don't know of any other industries where we limit this or do that, because this is like no other industry. It's federally prohibited. It's a weird industry it's brand new. So we do have to consider that as we go. So there are some weird things that are going to happen that are not typical of capitalist economics and American democracy. I think you'll probably see some weird stuff like that through cannabis regulation for a few years, at least until federal prohibition is lifted. And then, so some special regulation I think is worthwhile, even though I'm generally anti-regulation with everything. And then so in terms of limiting the general scale, or maybe we're talking about the investment, the cash investment that might displace local businesses, you know, we're talking about, I would like to see the greatest number of entrepreneurs, not necessarily the largest scale entrepreneurs. That's kind of the angle I kind of would like to see leaning toward. And I think maybe the more effective way would be to limit it by license type. We talked a lot about that. And the volatile manufacturing is primarily what attracts the big money, because there's a lot of money in it. And it also is easy to divert highly extracted materials into the black market, honestly. So I think a lot of extractors are taking advantage of getting licenses, and then they're moving large quantities of product into the black market. I don't know if that's true, but I suspect it, because it's easy to do. So volatile manufacturing is kind of what drives the investment side of it. And we did talk about not including that. And I think that could probably take care of a lot of it. And we were started to just touch on what the definitions of that meant. And there's a lot of money and investment in CO2 extraction, which looks like, per the state definition, is not included in volatile extraction. It's a non-volatile extraction process. So I don't know if it's worth making a distinction around that or not. That would be a good business. It generates jobs. It's good for industry. It'd be good for, my machine shop. It creates jobs all around, so definitely don't want to limit job creation. But there's all different kinds of license types. We could maybe move into it slowly. There's license types that are only for manufacturing edibles. There's manufacturing license. We were talking about this before. There's the type P manufacturing license is for packaging only and processing only. There's a type N, which is for making edible or topical products only. So I think that we could potentially ease into it slowly and add more intensive license types as we go, so as not to open up the real estate speculative market all at once to all the license types.
I have a couple of comments, but after that, I'd like somebody to address, maybe Joel or Heidi or someone, that if we come up with parameters at this point in time, how easily can they be changed and adjusted as we move forward, say a year or 5 years from now, and we learn that there's a new need. In regards to, I'm going to go after you, Kurt, trying to give more examples or more of an understanding of what I see as a potential negative on down the line. A long time ago, 20 years ago, I was in a meeting where somebody suggested we build this international airport on Serena Road out in Smith River. And we had a willing land seller and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, well, great, but that's just insanely stupid. We don't need an international airport in Del Norte County. Sure, it will attract a lot of stuff and buildings and development and real estate and economy, but from an ag point of view, as I'm just a farmer in the neighborhood and wanting to raise my family here in multiple generations, it would completely ruin that piece of our community. And so that's what I'm talking about. I'm in a lease option on a piece of ground right now, a small piece out in that part of the world, and we're buying it from a company that out of Taiwan, I believe, that bought it to grow a product here. And then they bought it and they were going to build and they were going to do something that they thought would be a great idea. Well, it had good intentions, but it fell apart. And so that's what I'm afraid of. In this particular industry that I don't know much about, I do know that there's money from many other countries that want to come into our world and into our backyards and invest in this. And that's what scares me. They'd look at our community and say, wow, a lot of potential for growth. Wow, cheap labor, cheap this, cheap that. But what they don't know is what's going to cause that business not to work. And so that's what I'm kind of protecting from. And again, I'm just proposing that we tiptoe into this a little smaller and keep some realistic parameters in the equation as we move forward so that we don't send the wrong signal. Answer to the question, if anyone, about stair-stepping this or
So, how easy it'll be to amend and change and adjust later really depends on the structure we choose now. I like the combining district idea from the retail applied to manufacturing too. And even maybe the same combining district, the Crescent City kind of urban area, you would apply for a use permit and also for a rezone of a property. It gives maximum control without kind of being this really open-ended thing where nobody knows what the county might permit and where. Exactly where the county might permit it and exactly what conditions have to be met. Under those circumstances, what makes sense to me would be basically have one combining district, C2, C3, C4 manufacturing for either retail or manufacturing, and just make it real simple. I think if you look at the map there, I don't know intimately all those parcels, but I don't think somebody's going to, under that situation, we're not opening ourselves up to somebody buying a large piece of land in the outskirts of town or in a real rural area and putting a big factory on it. Keeping it in the urban area might be, to some extent, a limiting factor. And Heidi can comment if she can think of a big empty spot where somebody might put something, or a big vacant warehouse in the urban area that might end up a failed enormous manufacturing situation. I don't know.
Yeah, we have some vacant manufacturing land and some that I would consider underutilized, but I don't have a real good grasp on that.
I think kind of funneling people to underutilized properties would be really good for us. Stopping people from turning green fields into big warehouses, obviously, I don't think would make anybody happy, no matter how profitable that is. So I do think probably limiting the areas in the county makes sense. Now, the group decided to keep retail kind of right there in town along the 101 in North Crest. I don't know if you all think that's the right place for manufacturing too, or if you want to allow it at other places, but a lot of the same considerations exist for getting services to those locations and law enforcement, fire, and traffic and all those things. So I think, keeping the whole conversation together makes sense to me. As far as the different types of manufacturing, if we have a combining district and use permit, we can amend that use permit fairly easily to change the types of state licenses we allow. I don't see that being a huge problem, but that does seem really limiting to me. I don't really think a real estate bubble, after Humboldt's already kind of gone through the ups and downs, is a huge fear here. Do you want to limit the opportunities for people to invest and play with the marketplace? Could be.
I remember we did discuss about the outlying areas over the last meeting, in particular with regards to retail. If I wouldn't want to see us limit, from my opinion, manufacturing and processing in outlying areas. And the reason I have based on that, and I spent a lot of time thinking about the reasoning behind why we would be considering limiting retail outlets in the outlying areas, and I have some apprehensions about that. I know that there were, the law enforcement situation, emergency services kind of thing. It seems like everybody's biggest concern is the cash flow. Again, I pointed out the fact that we have a hard liquor store in Gasky now, and I mean they do more cash sales in a day than probably a little small dispensary in Gasky would do. But we don't sit here and complain about the services and the response time to the liquor store in Gasky. It's ripe for thievery and robbery, just like any other business in this county in an outlying rural area. But I can see, and I would compromise some of the retail aspects of outlying areas, but I don't see where manufacturing and processing would play into that, because it's not a cash dealt business. It's a business that's paid usually by check. If the businesses are lucky enough to get a bank account, and as we're seeing in the state of California and other states, the banking industries are starting to move into this and open up some of their marketplaces. So that's going to start to, sway some of that stuff. So I truly don't see a need to limit manufacturing to just our urban areas. I think there's plenty of vacant buildings in other areas of our county that could be put to great use in a manufacturing or a processing space. I use Gasky as my example, because Gasky is probably going to be one of the areas we're going to have some of the cultivation zones. If we had a manufacturing or a processing space closer to a cultivation zone, we have less transportation, we have less means for it to be trucked in other directions. So I'd just like to throw that out there, considering manufacturing and processing in rural areas. It would probably be a good thing for us to think about.
I could see getting out to that point. I think probably the greater, the bigger reason for that and with retail was just simply to simplify the ordinance for a starting point. I think that the other reasons are sort of supporting reasons, but the real reason is we're trying to not make this too complicated and make it take too long. And I think kind of that's, for me personally, that's what it comes down to, is I'd like to, of course, find a way to, do it all, but it's just going to take too long. And I think the same follows with manufacturing. I think it's just easier and simpler to start, in a more condensed area, and then it helps to naturally limit, with retail we were trying to limit the number of outlets without having a cap, so it lent to that. With manufacturing, we don't want to limit the number. I'd like to see a greater number of smaller operations for sure. So I understand in terms of the security, it's the same kind of issue. It is a black market product though, a liquor store. Yeah, there's cash, but see people stealing a bunch of bottles of liquor and then trying to ship them to Chicago.
But you don't really see that happening right now in the legal
Sure.
marketplaces.
You're right.
Dispensaries are not being ripped off.
You're right.
I mean, if we want to talk about the real numbers, there hasn't been one.
Sure.
So, you know, that is something that people are using as a, I don't want to say a weapon, but as a cause to limit.
Sure.
But if we look at the facts are, not one retail dispensary in the entire country as of yet has been ripped off.
All right, well, let's not use that as a reason then. Let's just use simplicity as a reason.
Absolutely.
All right.
I mean, for sure, because again, I mean, the retail dispensaries I can understand. The need for them in the outlying areas, I'm not necessarily sure about that yet. Tourism is definitely going to be picking up at some point soon for cannabis. And so I do see that at some point in the future, we would probably be best bet to have an outlying area dispensary. But for manufacturing and processing, I just really believe that for a cultivator, if a majority of our products, say 75% of the Del Norte grown product is being cultivated in Gasky and Hyuchi, in some of our TPZ zones and some of our PO zones, having a manufacturer or processor close by would be very helpful from a cultivator standpoint. And there's a lot of prime properties, vacant properties in those spaces that I think are all in the C4, C2, and C1 zoning. So to limit those and say, all right, we're just going to completely leave those vacant because we want to move slow. If there were somebody that was willing to lease a space like that and literally put some money into, say, like, the Gasky station, something that could be rezoned to do manufacturing or processing, I think that's a great thing for the county, because buildings like that have been sitting since I've been here, 15 years. I mean, they pop up here and there, and I mean, a business comes up and a business fails. So I'm not personally, from my personal opinion and standpoint, I'm not concerned with people trying something and failing. That's how we've evolved. That's how we grow. We learn from our mistakes and we do something better the next time. So again, those are just issues that I think are, not necessarily, in my mind, the most valid reasons to limit.
Sure, yeah, there's nothing wrong with somebody investing a bunch of money and building a nice building somewhere and then going out of business and then the building going up for sale for cheap. I mean, that'd be good for me, really. I could pick up a building for cheap, so that's not necessarily the end of the world. If somebody builds wrecks some ag land with a big building and then leaves it, maybe that's not as cool, but, that's not going to happen. Let's trust our planning commission not to allow that. But I think this is where license types really comes into play, because the different kinds of manufacturing are very, very distinctly different. A type N, where I'm making topicals, I should be able to do that on my farm in conjunction with a cultivation permit, but having a whole bunch of employees and a sanitary environment for something else, or a lab process or a CO2 extraction setup, for example, that should be in an industrial area as designed, as it's designed to be. So I think that it is important to make a distinction. If we're going to talk about C2 and C3, then certainly, small scale, the other types of licenses, the type N, the type Ps, topicals, edibles, processing, those are low intensity operations that are suitable in the same kind of place that a dispensary would be in. But the more intensive ones, I think, might not be suitable. It might not be appropriate to have a CO2 extraction facility in a C2. I don't know.
What type of waste streams are generated by these products, and does the county have the capacity to deal with the waste streams?
Yeah, the state regulations are pretty tight. You're not allowed, you can't discharge anything, if that's what you mean.
I was
So, yeah,
referring to kinds of solvents that are used in extractions, the kinds of
Sure.
waste that's generated. I know we've had a limited capacity to deal with waste that's non-agricultural in this county.
Sure,
for a
yeah,
while.
part of why it's so expensive to set up these operations is you're not allowed to throw anything away. You can't dump solvents in the drain. I mean, it's all have to be closed loop systems certified by an engineer. I have the books here that explain all the regulations in detail, so for specific things I can look them up and answer the questions, but it's pretty intense. And in order to be compliant with the state rules, I would say it would be probably one of the cleanest industries compared to anything.
Yeah, and-
Other than specific questions,
And the multiple types of processing too, the extraction process. The CO2, which is considered by the state to be a non-volatile gas, it's a closed loop system, so you're not supposed to be able to lose any gas out. Just like Jesse said, it's engineered by an engineer. But I think what we've been talking mostly about within our group and these discussions is doing mostly a lot of water-based extraction, which is basically just what it says. It's a cold water extraction. You use ice and water, and you agitate material through it, which separates the cannabinoid oils and trichomes from the material. So your byproduct from that is literally just water. After that point, that stuff would be then harvested, what they call harvested, and taken and dried in. I mean, if you're great, you have a freeze dryer and you throw it in a freeze dryer, just like you would freeze dry food. You would freeze dry that material, and then that material would be taken. You would store it, and a lot of people either sell that as a product, or then they refine it even more, and they use heat pressure, basically large heat presses that press down and they squeeze and vaporize the cannabinoid oil from the organic matter, separate that out, and then they harvest that, what they call rosin, from that. And so that process actually is, the byproduct of that is just organic leaf matter left over in parchment paper. So in terms of that type of extraction, which is I think where a lot of the craft style extractions are coming from, is probably the least harmful to the environment. There's no residual left over of any solvents. No solvents are ever used in that process.
Here in the, this is from the Department of Health, cannabis manufacturing licensing. They have a whole section on hazard analysis. And so you have to do a pretty extensive hazard analysis for biological hazards, microbiological, chemical, radiological, pesticide, solvent, residue, natural toxins, decomposition, unapproved additives, food allergens, physical hazards, etc. And there's a whole section on the protocol for the manufacturing in association with that hazard assessment. And then there's a section on waste, all the rules. You have to pay for everything yourself. There isn't anything that you can put on the locality to pay for. You have to use approved waste haulers or handlers, etc. You have to certify personally the contents of the waste. Cannabis waste has to be secured and locked and accounted for a certain time period. Entered into the track and trace system. You give a consent to sample collections for your waste. It goes on and on. It's pretty comprehensive.
I would like to maybe kind of rein us back into a handful of bullet points that I've kind of got identified. I don't have everything, but so we've fractionated off in about 5 directions here, all under the idea of how do we, best set some parameters.
Dairy products of any kind are prohibited in cannabis, just so you know, Blake.
Dairy products.
Yeah.
Good to know.
You can't make cannabis milk.
All right.
Sorry.
But I could bring out the T-shirt from the 70s that said "Get high off milk, our cows are on grass."
Yes.
Still go
you
with
can
that?
do that.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, that was just a little detour. I'm bringing this up because if anyone wants to weigh in on these 3 or 4 current subjects, I'm going to go back to the things that we've talked about that we need to make a decision on. One is there a physical size of the building and the manufacturing space, that 10,000 square foot that we talked about at our last meeting. The other one is this licensing as a mechanism to set parameters that JD's talked quite a bit about. The idea of combining districts that Joel brought up, we need to maybe fully understand what that means, and again, maybe a little visual of where those districts currently are in the neighborhood, so that we've got, we're not limiting Gasky and whatnot. Kate, I'd like to have you maybe weigh in as to where the Yurok tribe would be in terms of, you know, limiting anything happening down in the Klamath area. So those were kind of the 3 bullet points or so that I'm here just trying to summarize, right? Kind of weed out some of the stuff that isn't necessarily pertinent. It's all part of the big picture. You guys are seeing that we're somewhat open-minded, trying to banter back and forth and come up with the best solution. So is there anything out there right now that y'all think you need to weigh in on? Now would be the time. If not, we'll go to these points one at a time. All right. So
My name's Jim Nelson. I live at 251 Church Tree. Is it legal right now to be growing commercial marijuana?
Maybe Joel should answer that question.
And
He's
Delaware
the
County?
lawyer.
Is it legal to be growing commercial right now?
Yes.
If you have a license from the state, we don't currently have anything. Well, I guess the answer is, what is commercial? No, it's not legal to grow commercial marijuana right now.
All right.
Well,
in
it's
my
completely
community-
legal to continue to grow marijuana just like it has been for the
Yeah.
past 15 or 20 years in what most people would consider to be a commercial situation.
Well, in my community where I live, there's a 90 by 20 greenhouse that has over 100 plants in it right now. So whether it's legal or not, I don't know, but no one seems to be doing anything about it.
That is more than likely completely legal until 2019.
Okay. My neighbor happens to be a fellow who wrote the laws for cannabis in California and Colorado and some of the areas. So by chance, I met him when I was knocking doors to see what we could do about the smell and the problems that growing commercial would cause in our neighborhood. I consider Church Tree a very nice, one of the nicer areas in Delaware County. But lately, it's because of the smell of the marijuana during the summertime when it's growing is not really desirable. Anyway, I met with this man. I talked with him, and I asked him if he would be willing to help me because I knew our county was struggling for trying to get an ordinance put together. He got back with me, and I gave this to some of the, I don't know if it was county or city or whatever, but he gave me some of the ordinance that Lake County passed. I don't know if you guys ever got to look at it, but I did make 5 copies. I will leave with on the ordinance they passed that was tested, tried, and proved, and has held up as far as I know. Of course, it was a year ago when I passed it out. But I think we definitely need to consider the property where the greenhouse is growing in our neighborhood is on agricultural property, so that's probably going to be a legal situation. But I think we need to consider setbacks, obviously. That particular property is, their greenhouse is 84 feet away from a residence. And there's definitely a lot of room on this property. It's 5 acres. And so they definitely could do a setback a lot further away. I don't know if that would stop the smell. I live up on the hill, so I don't smell it, but when I come home, I smell it. And some of the people that are here that live in Church Tree right now, some of them live down at the bottom of the hill, and it's a terrible smell. I don't know if there's something that you guys can consider or if there's any way to help curb the smell of the growth of marijuana. But it's definitely going to lower the values of our property, I can tell you that. I'm in real estate, and there's already several properties, people that are leaving the Church Tree area because of the what's happening. And I'm in fear that it's going to definitely lower the values of our property. So I think obviously, because the property is zoned ag, we probably can't stop it, but I think we can definitely put some laws or rules out there in an ordinance that would maybe set them back further away from residents, do something to curb the smell of the marijuana, and obviously put up a fence so you're not looking at well, it's a greenhouse, so, you know, but, and then if we're gonna do that, we need to specify what kind of a fence. You go through Cave Junction, you see canvas, you see bed sheets. It needs to be stipulated in the ordinance what kind of material is a fence gonna be made of. That's gonna, you know.
Question for you about the fence that you're talking about. You can see that from your property, or you can see it from?
I can see it from my
a
property.
public road?
I can see it from my property and the neighbors can see it. I mean, there's no fence around it.
Well, no, but the question being, can you see it from a public right-of-way, let's say?
Yes.
Okay, so this is one of the things that the California regulations are attempting to put into place, and so we're in somewhat of a year where the regulations are still they're catching up. There's like kind of a grace period for previous existing laws that have been in place, and so there are some there's fencing things written into some of the California laws, and we definitely can look into it more. You know, I think most of that, I don't know if we can deal with it from private to private property, but you can deal with it from a public.
None of that would
right-of-way
apply to
position.
looking at a building, though. They're talking about looking at a greenhouse, not looking at plants. So those, you know, visual from a public right-of-way, that's plants, not greenhouses. So.
Well, the plants aren't visible.
Sure, right. I know the greenhouse you're talking
itself
about. I
is.
drive on Elk Valley Road regularly. I've seen it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just to be clear, like we've just barely gotten into the commercial cultivation section. We just sort of touched on it for a few minutes at the end of the last meeting. So we really haven't gotten into anything about like what are going to be the appropriate zonings, the appropriate setbacks, setbacks from what other types of zonings, these kinds of things. So we haven't really even gotten there. So this public comment's very important for the development of that as we go forward. As far as current rules and regulations, on our group we have the sheriff and Bill Stevens fills in for him sometimes, and neither one of them are here today. So I would have asked them to come and maybe address your questions for current law enforcement, what their strategy is, what they intend to do in this interim time. So that is definitely not our purview in terms of like determining what's legal and what isn't. But the discussion about this is exactly what we want to hear as we go forward with the cultivation details.
My other issue is, being they are there now, and they're pre-existing, and then the law does change to say, okay, you're going to have to be 150 feet away from residence or 200 feet away from residence, you're going to have to do this. Because they're pre-existing, will they be able to continue to use this greenhouse, or maybe several other greenhouses?
It may be more of a legal question, maybe as it goes down, but I don't know if I should even answer this, but for the most part.
This is something that could be put in an ordinance.
Sure, I think for the most part, because there doesn't exist any commercial operations, and this is all brand new. This
I understand
just
that.
started, and so whatever's going on now isn't licensed by the state, is what I'm trying to say. And so, or it may be, I don't know, because we had an open period of 60 days where people were able to apply for licenses.
It's not this group's intention to grandfather things in. We've
Right.
crossed that bridge many times already, so.
Okay.
That business operating there will be, he'll have to comply, or they will have to comply completely with all the regulations put in place by the county and the state to garner both a county and a state permit. And so,
Sure.
whatever
Which might be an
parameters you-
annual permit, so they're
I think it's-
subject to that.
Yeah,
May I
state-
also add,
the
and
state
that's
exactly
if
is an
we
annual
choose
permit.
to allow these operations in ag zones, which we haven't made that decision. And if you don't want to see something like that in your neighborhood, I think by attending these meetings and advocating not to have it in A zones and pushing it to some of the other zones that we've discussed today may be beneficial.
Well, I could say for a fact, I'm not interested in seeing it. I know what it's going to do to my property values.
Yeah.
And I'm quite sure the rest of the Church Street people are going to say, no, they don't want to see it. But there's a legal thing too. Ag property is zoned for agriculture, so how can you step in and say, hey, you can't grow?
Well, that's not how the cannabis regulation, there's be nothing that will be principally permitted. Everything
Yeah.
will come through a use permit, and the county has the ability to decide what zonings things can be, and the county could do something silly and say it's only allowed in a residential zone. That would be silly, but the county has the ability to pick the zonings or not, regardless. So the fact that it's zoned ag doesn't matter. It's not a principally permitted agricultural activity.
It's my excuse me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding in 30 days, the personal cultivation ordinance would at least limit the size of that under the nuisance ordinance. Is that not correct, Joel?
Well, that's actually a question I was hoping not to have to answer. You know, the personal cultivation ordinance is a civil regulation. If we wanted to apply it to existing operations on a cooperative model, I think we could. I think we could say that if there's more than 6 plants on any grow in the county, it's a nuisance, starting, 29 days. As a matter of policy, as a dedication of, our county's one code enforcement officer, I think it's probably everybody's intention to wait it out till January 1st when those are actually, will have to be under permit from the state, and start our enforcement efforts then when everything's clear. But there's an argument to be made that we could do it sooner than that. It's an argument.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
thank you very much.
Is there someone else? Sure.
I'm going to be redundant here. I'm Jeannie Westfall. My address is 191 Church Tree Road. Lived there 20 years. And we put blood, sweat, and tears into our home. And the smell in the summer of last year could not even, the 2-3 months out of the year when we can open our windows and enjoy our coastal breeze and our beautiful blue skies and weather, we could not do it. It stunk like a dead skunk. And it's horrible. And I just hope you guys take that into consideration when you allow something like this, over 100 plants, to be grown in a residential neighborhood with children next door, 85 feet away, and across the street. And I'm 2 doors away from it. Cannot open my windows in the summer. Thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
I see some nodding heads out there agreeing with that statement, so thank you.
Also, for the record, Mrs. Westfall's husband has been in contact with our office many times, so we're very aware of the
All right.
situation.
I'm Vern McCullough. I live on 180 Church Tree Road, and we have correctional officers that live on that street. And when I was working there, I'm retired now, there's a lot of times when things get, or the overtime just gets really immense, where they hold you over a couple times in a day or a couple days. But you're putting people in jeopardy that have to be awake for that job, and they're doing long overtimes, and they're licensed to take care of business on the yards out there if the inmates go off. And we've had a few riots, but I don't think it's your guys' best interest to put people in grave danger. But you got to think about people that, work in this environment and what they have to deal with every day. If they can't get over that smell or whatever, I don't think it's your guys' choice to put people in that position. There's 4 or 5 kids also that ride up and down that, on their bicycles up and down that street, and they're right in front of that dispensary or whatever, grow house. And then late at night, I hear vehicles down there, and I see them parked with their engines running and their lights on, doing something to the greenhouse down there. And I don't appreciate that too, especially when it's such a quiet road. But that's kind of my input.
Could I ask you a couple of questions? I'm struggling to follow your point exactly. Yeah. Tell us from your perspective, just one sentence at a time, what do you want? You don't want this? Forget what we're doing and why we're here. But
Yeah, I think you guys would be better off putting this greenhouse away from
Yeah, so you don't want it
families.
in the neighborhood.
I don't want it in the neighborhood.
Okay, next sentence.
Yeah.
You think it was caused, what was, I didn't follow you on the issue about somebody going to work and late and early and,
Yeah, when you're working 16 hours and you have to, and you can't go home because the job orders you over.
right, so your
Yeah.
point is that
It's deprivation.
having this in the neighborhood adds extra stress
I
when
think
you
his
get home?
point,
Oh,
I
yeah,
think his
there's a
point
lot
is
of
that he
stress
can't
involved when
sleep
you're-
because
Yeah,
of the
that-
smell.
It's not a peaceful home
Got it.
environment for you.
No,
Right, I
no.
get it.
Okay.
yeah.
And then that guy that lives right next to that, he's got people that show up in the middle of the night with their engines running, their headlights on. And it wakes me up. I look out the window and I go, wonder what's going on down there, And that's pretty disruptive.
Okay.
And he needs his hours of sleep because, it's all in the balance.
Yeah. I
When the
understand.
yard goes down and you have to shoot, and you quite, your brain's still in a fog, that's not good.
Gotcha.
I actually appreciate your comment, but I do just want to mention that we're talking about agricultural land. You guys do live in ag-zoned property, each one of
Yeah,
your
there's like
properties?
5 acres or.
Yeah, actually, their
Is there
land,
residential zones
their
in that
land is
area?
zoned residential. They
Okay.
abut,
So
some
an
of them
ag
may have
land
ag, but for
abuts
the most part.
residential zoning
As you
area.
come
Yeah.
onto
Okay.
the property, the first lower half is all agriculture, and then there's just beautiful homes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I had noticed that you had mentioned residential, and so and he had mentioned ag, so I was wondering if,
And that kind of blows it for the whole street, but it's all families, and I've just paid my house off down there last year, so.
yeah.
You know.
I totally understand, the aspect of wanting peace and quiet in your home. I actually live on the Highway 199, not that far off of the highway, and those trucks keep me up all night long. I mean, anytime one of the manufacturing or delivery trucks drives down the road, they hit their Jake brakes right as they come down the slope and past the tunnel, and it literally shakes my house to the foundations. So, I definitely feel for that need to feel like you can relax when you're home. Truthfully, I don't know what we as a group or what the county as a group can do specific to those types of things because, Blake probably has, he has a dairy farm and Kurt, has a bulb farm, and a lot of businesses and ag businesses do operate in, timeframes that don't necessarily coincide with our natural work hours. So I don't know what we can do about that, but I definitely appreciate your guys' comments, and I think that that's something that we need to think about is ag and residential abutments, because I think Heidi, that probably exists in a lot of spaces in the county, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
So thank you, Vern. I appreciate it. And, what can we do about things like that is, we own some trucks in part of our business, and we had a neighbor lady once say, hey, those Jake brakes are driving me nuts. So we have a no Jake brake policy, right? That's what we teach our drivers, and because we're aware of that. And it's just
And then
awkward, cumbersome.
We have a neighbor that's right at the end of my driveway across the street, that's had her place up for sale for quite some time, and she's had it. She's wanting to move, but everybody that drives up there and sees that big greenhouse,
They're going the other way.
they're going the
Okay.
other way.
So it's important that, the community speaks out and we get a sense and we get an understanding of this, so, thank you.
I got a question for any one of you folks in Church Tree. I completely agree, first of all, with a lot of what you're saying. Although we haven't gotten to the discussion, I think everyone here would agree that large setbacks from residential zones is appropriate for cannabis farming. But it's the cannabis, it's not the greenhouse, right? It's like the greenhouse, if it was full of raspberries, that'd be cool, right? No? No. So that's kind of the thing is I totally, so that's the cannabis, not the greenhouse. So if it was a greenhouse full of raspberries and it smelled like raspberries, sure, then they'd have the right to agriculture because they could principally permitted do agricultural operate. They could run tractors at midnight probably. and be a real nuisance. But that would be a different issue. And so I'm definitely a advocate for not having cannabis farms anywhere near residential zones. But I'm not an advocate for limiting agricultural operations that are not cannabis related adjacent, because I have a residential property that's adjacent to a large agricultural property, and I don't have the same rights on my property that the agricultural operation has. And so they run tractors and till fields, and there's tons of horse manure, and it blows my way offshore all year long. And I can't do anything about it. But I would never say that cannabis should have that right. And there's like I believe it's the Williamson Act or something that allows, you can't complain about agricultural operations when you move into an ag zone. But the state says that doesn't apply to cannabis. Cannabis farmers can't use that argument. And so it's entirely appropriate and within the power of the county to limit cannabis operations just based on the fact that it's cannabis and nothing else, far away from residential zones.
Okay, good discussion. I'm just, again, I'm a farmer out in a whole lot of ag zones. I was out of town a couple weeks ago, and my son was running an operation where we're harvesting feed. We went until 1:30 in the morning. One of the neighbors called and complained because the trucks were loud because we were exiting or on the back side of the ranch, somewhere where we normally don't. And so we now have a policy. We will not do that. We just didn't think about it. And so I also encourage you all as neighbors and citizens of us one community, talk to the person that's bothering you. Go solve it on your own. We are here trying to write some rules and parameters about, an industry that, I frankly don't want to have to participate in, but I'm here and I'm going to do my share to represent a certain side of the segment of our industry or of our community, and we're going to try to come up with some sound policy and an ordinance that we believe is acceptable. So I'm going to go back to those 3 bullet points. If there's any comments on that, I'd like to just kind of work through that, and mainly because we talked about the 10,000 square foot limit last time when you weren't here, Kurt, and I'm guessing you would prefer us not to even use a number, and I think that's a possibility. I don't know.
Kurt, what do you think about limiting license type? What do you think about not including volatile manufacturing?
Yeah, I have no problem with any of that. I have no problem with limiting volatile. I'd like to see in front of me a better listing of all the possible licenses that could fall under these 2 categories so that we could better understand every single one and come up with, as a group, because it would help if everyone as a group had all of these different things.
4 license types. There's the one that lets you do everything. I think that's type 7.
You want to read through them?
Sure.
Yeah.
They were in front of you.
So type 7 is for extractions using volatile solvents, and then you can also do everything else. Type 6 is for extractions using mechanical methods or non-volatile solvents as defined in this section, and we went over that a little bit. So that would include CO2 and ethanol extractions are defined as non-volatile extractions. And then you can also do the other license types, which underneath that is type N for manufacturers that produce edible products or topical products using infusion processes or other types of cannabis products other than extracts or concentrates, but that do not conduct extractions. That's a type N. And then you can also package and label cannabis with that license. Type P is for manufacturers that only package or repackage cannabis products or label or relabel cannabis product containers. And then that one I believe that there is a processing license that's not under manufacturing. I don't know if it doesn't talk about processing, so I'll have to look that up. But as far as manufacturing, that seems to be the 4 categories: volatile, non-volatile, topical, and packaging.
So, I think everybody pretty much agreed to non-volatile last time.
Yeah, Kurt just wasn't here, that's why I asked.
Okay. If that is agreed upon, is there a need to then go into packaging versus other things?
I was just going to ask it this way, and thanks, Joel. So I made a yes column and a no column, and I've got the type 7 in the no column. I think we're all in agreement there. And then I had actually everything else in a yes column at this point, unless
It's the CO2 and ethanol extractions could potentially be quite a bit different than a type N or a type P. That's an industrial operation that requires OSHA approval and, you know, special fire department equipments and firewalls and blah, 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 like, versus having a kitchen, you know, so they're definitely different. And that falls under non-volatile. And so that's where we kind of found that definition late. We were thinking that CO2 was under volatile, so we would have to make a county distinction for extraction types, not license types, which I don't know if you want to get into that.
Well, I mean, it's, if the county wants to define volatile differently,
Right.
we can come up with a definition. But are you saying that you want to allow CO2 extraction, but just not in the same places, or in the same
That's kind
circumstances?
of the way I'm leaning. I'm not sure. I mean, I wouldn't want to, there's, you know, the big money thing is in CO2, but it's also good jobs, and it's a big part of the cannabis market, and a lot of manufactured products utilize CO2 extracted products.
Well,
It would be
you
good to
know,
have here.
they'd have to comply with all of those state laws. They'd have to
Sure.
comply with OSHA. They'd have to
Sure.
comply with that to get the use permit.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, I'm not really totally sure what this operation would look like, if it's going to be, you know, physically larger in size or louder or whatever, just because they're using CO2, but
No.
would our use permit process provide the necessary protection and regulation? Or are you saying that maybe in a C4 zone, CO2 extraction's okay, but a C3 it wouldn't be?
No, I think it probably, the use permit, because it's so intermixed here. I mean, you might have a C3 location that's actually more appropriate than a
So
C4. I
case
don't
by
know.
case.
Case by case,
Yeah,
sure.
special circumstances is what I wrote, just
Sure.
special consideration for COT.
And
CO2. Yeah,
that would
CO2 and
basically fall under
ethanol.
what Joel was saying would be the use permit
Right. Like
scenario.
some higher level of review. Like, I don't know.
I
So-
think you also need to consider the volatility of ethanol when you're
Sure.
considering special use permits, because someplace rural without adequate fire protection,
Absolutely.
that's a real danger.
Sure, and I was like, there was confusion here last time of whether or not that was included in the non-volatile, because it can be volatile, obviously, but
Did
yeah,
we
you're
get
right.
an answer to
you're right.
that?
Yeah, it's in the non-volatile license type, but
Yeah.
obviously different, but you have to comply. It doesn't mean that you can do it without meeting all the fire code
And I-
requirements and such. Part of your operation plan has to include all these things before it would be approved.
And the ethanol extraction is basically just an evaporation process. They put it in a roto evaporator, kind of like it's basically a scientific lab mantle. And those temperatures don't get up to combustible temperatures. So you have to get to a certain temperature before you can combust ethanol gas. And it actually has to be a live flame. So I think that's why they consider that a non-volatile. You know, a lot of the ethanol extraction is used for food grade extraction processes. So that, I mean, if we're considering doing food edible manufacturing, we would probably want to consider allowing for the alcohol extraction process to help along with that edible market.
Okay, so again, I'm looking for some closure here in regards to how we handle these licensing. So we had a T6, TN, and TP that we would all, I think, consider allowable. Is that, yes, heads nodding?
Yeah.
Depending on where?
Um,
Depending on the location.
But we didn't talk about location. Well,
Right.
The license, that'd be through the planning commission, and the review process would be determining what license types would be appropriate and what zoning. But we were talking
Okay,
about
what's
zoning
your-
in general.
What's your concern? First of all, I only mentioned those four. We didn't get into CO2 yet. CO2 is the one that.
Well, that's
the-
under
the
that. That's
location.
under type 6.
That's type 6, ethanol and
Got
CO2
it.
are type 6.
Right. And they would just, I think we could, Joel's saying we could write that with those particular extraction types would follow a higher level of review with the planning commission to be more definitions, perhaps.
I think that the committee up here, like Blake's kind of trying to get to, is under the manufacturing process of the cannabis. I think what we, as a committee, can regulate or should regulate is the zoning, and then the types of licenses, and staying away from the square footage that'll kind of do its own deal. But the types of zoning is going to be very crucial because of where it would be at. And then the types of licenses, I'm not too sure that I'm in favor of the T6 with the ethanol in it, but like Jesse may have said, that you could have that in your process, but then the planning could change the ethanol or the CO2 part of it if we were in favor of the CO2.
Yeah, they could like deny that permit application if it looked like it was not in an appropriate location, I think, or your plan didn't look safe or whatever, you know, but regardless, you'd have to comply with all the very stringent state rules. So if the location was, you know, legitimately not located for safety reason, then it probably wouldn't comply with state rules either. But.
I have a question in regards to ethanol, and I'm asking because I'm absolutely ignorant on this and I don't know. At our house, we make tinctures with alcohol using herbs for our cattle and our people. So ethanol is an alcohol. You mentioned that it's used as a gas and through evaporation. It's not a tincture extraction.
We make tinctures also that don't use any kind of evaporating, where we just soak alcohol in the cannabis product and then use it directly. There's no evaporating or gassing.
Form.
Yeah.
All right, got it.
Just a bottle of vodka and some cannabis. You don't consume it like that, but
Yeah, no, that's
a drop at a time.
That's how we're making ours. Okay, very good.
So should we be considering then, and I don't know, I'm not really familiar exactly with all the C2, 3, 4 properties and whatnot, but for certain licenses and or certain components like the CO2 whatnot, should we consider setbacks from residential properties within these zones? Because I think a lot of C whatever properties could potentially be right up against a residential zone property, and should we be having a setback for either the building or the property itself from that?
Yeah, I believe the C1s are like mostly mom and pop store within residential areas.
Time out just for a second, because I want to stay on order here. And to me, that's going to be our point 3, which is this concept of combining districts. Right now, let's stay on the subject of these license types and kind of close that door if we could, as long as it doesn't.
For license types, I would be personally in favor of all those license types, dependent upon the answer to what I was just asking.
Yeah, so we need to go.
But if the answer to what I was asking was maybe we don't want any setbacks, then I would maybe not be in favor of some of those license types. So that was the reason why I asked the setback question.
As far as zoning, I think for simplicity, when Joel was saying for the combining districts, let's keep it the same as what we agreed on for retail and not dip into C2s. Because that, we start retail at C3 and C4, right? Isn't that, am I right on that? Or?
You mean,
I thought we just removed C1, but I could be wrong.
Oh, okay.
for retail sales, I
Okay,
think it's
C1, so
C2.
C2 was included then?
That is correct,
Okay.
yes.
So the idea of keeping it the same as retail in terms of the overall zoning makes sense. Setbacks, residential setbacks make sense on some of the more intensive operation types like CO2 or ethanol extractions. That makes sense. I don't know if that overcomplicates things, but.
Well, I mean, let's go back to what Blake was saying. Where is this, is it the consensus that CO2 and ethanol, basically all those on the yes column are going to be allowed? Because if so, what I would suggest is not defining them or anything, just say non-volatile is allowed. The use permit process is going to pick up all extra regulations from the state, and we can add in some findings by the planning commission, you know. The board finds in writing that this does not negatively impact X, Y, and Z. And then do the exact same combining district, you know, the same area. We're talking about the Crescent City urban outskirts, basically.
So I'm going to suggest that we take the licensing first, unless it, you know, you got to weigh in, like Kurt just did. But let's stick with the licensing real quickly. And what we had talked about, or what I wrote down, was, you know, CO2 under special issues or circumstances, or special permission. You know, so what we're trying, what I'm envisioning is, okay, we adopt the yes to all these things. However, when CO2 or if we want to add ethanol is involved, there's a special conversation at the planning commission or wherever during that process that either allows it or doesn't.
Is that kind of like,
So we
that's what I
ask
heard
that
you
it
say.
always gets called out.
Right, that sounds right.
So, yeah, okay, so where the use permit would do either of those activities, we can have an extra finding by the planning commission, which will require review on the record. It's something that can be appealed, right? If they have to make a finding, then people can come in and appeal to the Board of Supervisors and say that finding is bogus, and it gives an extra level of protection.
And now let me ask this question, because this is in contrast to what I started out with in my opening statement, was that, you know, we're tasked with trying to write this ordinance that can be adopted, you know, without a lot of fuzziness and wishy-washiness in it, right? So here we are allowing a little fuzziness, and I'm just asking this because I really don't know the answer. Is that the right thing at this point right now, or should we continue on it and deal with it?
Well, I think it's, when you understand all the rules and regulations from the state, it's a little less fuzzy. So for example, with ethanol extractions, the extraction operation shall be approved by the local fire code official. So there's another back check, and they can just say, no, I don't like this. You know, I'm sure they have to give their reasons and stuff, but, you know, if there's a legitimate reason, the local fire official can deny the permit. It shall be operated in accordance with Division of Occupational Health and Safety Standards, CalOSHA, and any other relevant state and local requirements.
So one thing is that while the use permit would say you have to comply, or you have to get your state license and comply with all requirements, our process would have to go first, or they wouldn't be able to get that state license. So, you know, we might consider things like getting that fire official approval on our permit, instead of just assume they're going to get it. On the other hand, if they have to get it either way, why make, you know, why confuse their process and where they're getting what permissions from whom? So I don't know. I think it is an appropriate kind of fuzziness to give that finding, because if people don't show up to the planning commission and object, it's really not an issue. If people do, it gives them an opportunity to be heard, something to appeal, something's going to put on the record, something there's going to be evidence for. And so when people care, it won't seem fuzzy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's the mechanism the county has in place to use. We might as well use it to our best ability.
Okay. So I'm just going to summarize one more time. We've got no to T7, a yes to the other types, with special consideration, subject to, in regards to CO2 and ethanol.
And so I'm in the process of drafting the retail. And so I've already built in something really similar to this for churches in the retail. And so it's not going to be this foreign concept. It'll be, it's be the way our process is. Here's the finding you make it in writing, you vote on it. If you don't make it, that doesn't pass. And so I think this should be pretty workable.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. The next deal is this concept of combining districts, the commercial districts 2, 3, and 4, which seems to be where we're at. So we're excluding C1.
Is everybody clear what
No,
the
maybe,
combining district concept is?
maybe please give us a,
All right. So you'll have zones that exist in the county, C2, C3, C4, manufacturing zones. If we wanted to say you can do it in a C2 zone with a use permit, we'd have to let you do it in any C2 zone with a use permit. So what the combining district does is actually create a new zoning category that says you can do everything you already could do in a C2 zone and obey all those same rules, but you can also do cannabis activity, manufacturing or retail, whatever you specify, with a use permit. It's actually a new zone, so you don't have the problems where you have inconsistent uses between the same zone anymore. It's illegal. What we could do is take an area where we think it's okay and rezone all that property to the combined district. That's a lot more work for the county. The best way to cover our costs is to say you have to apply for a rezone to the combining district along with your use permit, and then you pay for that process. And so it's going to be parcel by parcel. I want this to be combining district. I'm applying for it. The planning commission go through the thing, make findings that that's appropriate, consistent with the general plan. The neighbors will get notice. Everybody can come up and argue both the use permit and the combining district, the rezone, at the same time. So sometimes if you're rezoning one property, you get these kind of substantive due process problems where you're creating a spot zone. But these won't be wildly incompatible uses. We're talking about a place where you can already do commercial uses, or you're going to do retail, you can already do manufacturing. We're just allowing a specific kind, and I'm not worried that we're going to run into spot zoning issues there. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question that might be for Heidi. I know that rezoning is very expensive and there's a fee schedule that goes along with that. Is there a way we can make it cheaper in this circumstance than a regular rezone?
Potentially. I mean, different types of rezones do have different costs associated with them. So potentially there would be a cannabis, whatever that combining district rezone, and we could assign a fee to it. That would need to be approved by the board.
Got it, thank you.
Would this combining zone be available to, say, any type of commercial zoned property in the county, or are we considering, again, in the urban Crescent City outlying areas?
Well, let's nail that down. I like the idea of keeping it in the exact same footprint as the retail and expanding later if it seems necessary. But we can say the Crescent City Plains sub-area and Gasky and Hiuchi and still stay clear of Klamath or Smith River. We could, we could still use it like that. Or we could add areas later. It's easier to add areas later than get rid of them later, so.
And I guess I only bring that up, again, one of our concerns as a group has been the skyrocketing potential real estate prices. And I know there's a less of a concern as the market has kind of gone through some of its maturity aspects through the state. But one thing that I have noticed in a lot of jurisdictions that do have these spot zonings, those areas are where the property prices have gone through the roof. Arcata, for instance, has its green zone. Took a large section of its manufacturing and industrial area, rezoned that for cannabis use, and I mean, now you've got square foot lease prices up in $6 to $7 range. That would be my one pretty much and only concern with the combining zone district is we may be boxing ourselves into what we've been kind of worried about this whole time, is the ability for local investors, local entrepreneurs to garner the investment capabilities to get a property like that in a combined zone would be very difficult. That I think would be something we should probably discuss a little bit more, because I think that would be the one kind of kicker that would lead into a real estate kind of, shock value thing. Where
You're right about the Arcata's MMIZ zone, and I used to lease a shop there at one time, and it's like 6 or 7 times what it is now, and a lot of the traditional business got displaced from there, and leases got canceled, and shops had to move. But that zone actually is small compared to what we're looking at. And then Humboldt County came in and I think allowed it in all of their commercial areas for the most part. And then everybody who bought in of the MMIZ zone at super high prices were wishing that they hadn't, because dealing with the city of Arcata seems sometimes to be more difficult than the county, but that might be turning around the other way now.
Well, you know, if we keep a close watch on what's happening and prices start skyrocketing, we can open up more space. What I like about limiting it to that footprint is trying to encourage some infill and rehabbing some of those properties. And, you know, we could have an ordinance that says you can't build a new building for this, but I like that less. Like, just do it here where these old buildings are, and I think we're more likely to get those buildings rehabbed.
Okay, that's good, Joel. I'm kind of in agreement with what you're saying. I'm wondering if someone could give us, and for the audience and everyone, a quick summary of what we did on the zoning for the retail, and then, you know, if we're going to generally recommend that footprint or that process, just a quick understanding of that, and then we need to address the Klamath and the exceptions to this version. And Kate, still waiting for you maybe to weigh in, if you could, with what you think or would like to see or not see.
The tribe has a zero tolerance policy and would like a ban in Klamath. We don't have a grocery store in Klamath. We don't have the basics in Klamath. We don't need a cannabis retail store in Klamath.
And in terms of manufacturing and processing, you're going to include that also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
I have a question. If or when ever the Yurok tribe decided not to have a zero tolerance policy and change that policy, would there then be an idea that that could all be changed in Klamath? Or would the Yurok tribe be trying to, you know, conduct that business if they chose to without the county being able to? Well, you're wanting to see a no zone, let's say, in Klamath, right? And so this is because, I'm guessing because the Yurok tribe has a zero tolerance policy. However, that could change either in the near future or the distant future. And would that then, in theory, I'm guessing the Yurok tribe then would be okay with lifting the no zone if the Yurok tribe decided no longer to be a zero tolerance tribe like several other tribes are.
That's pretty far distant from anything I can weigh in on. It would be a council decision to change that policy, and as far as I know, that's not in the winds. I think it has to be addressed if and when it happens. By that time, a lot of things may have changed.
Okay, I was just trying to see, so the main basis behind it is solely the fact that the Yurok tribe is a zero tolerance tribe.
So, yeah, and I think it's a great question or a good point. I think let's ask it differently maybe, and Joel, if you could weigh in on this. So what I heard right there was, right now we have the Yurok tribe in that region saying, please stay out. Don't. We would like a county ordinance that honored that, and we're all willing to go that direction. However, if they were to change their mind down the road, and we have a county ordinance in place because of that said stay away, and now they change their mind with a new attitude and a new approach, is the rest of the county going to be held out of this area, and they're going to now control a little monopoly on the deal? That's kind of what I picked up out of that, and so.
So here's kind of how that works. The tribe can do things and we can't stop them, right? On trust land or tribally owned fee land. But what they need to participate in the cannabis marketplace that California's created is authorization from the county. It's kind of odd, right?
Okay.
If they want access to the legal marketplace, they need the county's permission.
At the moment.
At the moment.
There are things happening in tribal sovereign communications with the state that are going around that at the moment. That's in the works.
Everything is always going to be in flux for the next while. But if, I can see the fear. We prevent all cannabis activity in the area around the reservation at the urging of the tribe. The tribe turns around and decides to do whatever they want, we would just, we just have to make the decision to change what we do.
Change the ordinance.
Yeah, change the ordinance.
Okay. All right, we talked about it. I feel better. So back to the kind of the question at hand, which is this combining districts, the C2, 3, 4, and M. Are we generally all understanding what that would mean? And then following the footprint and the template set by our retail zoning. To encourage infilling. I like that.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, use the facilities and the structure that's already out there.
Sure.
That totally makes sense.
And,
I can
you know,
defend that.
we can come up with maybe a clear map of what that area is, but.
I would like to see this. I'd like everyone to be able to see it, read it in writing, and really digest it to
Okay.
see. And I'd also like to show it to, you know, our planner and folks who are involved in planning, just to see, get their feedback at this point before we move too far down the road on it.
Okay. So we're all in agreement to this point, generally? Sure, come on up.
Aye.
Hi, my name is Robert Munns at 170 Church Tree Road. I didn't really come prepared to speak, but as I listened, you're trying to find a one position fits all. And looking at my neighborhood is a little bit different. That hasn't been brought up. That's a one way in, one way out neighborhood. It's all residential except 2 lots at the bottom. Okay, across the street are houses with small children who are breathing these fumes. So there has to be something in there to protect them. And that's really all I have to say. I mean, it's going to come up. I hate to see something finished and then have these exceptions. But when they're breathing, I mean, lots of small children, very small, right across the street from this lot that is doing that. And I haven't heard that, you know, brought up at all. So anyhow, that's all I had.
Okay.
Thank you.
Robert.
Yeah, I'd like to just comment on that. And I think that's just because we haven't gotten much into the meat of the cultivation discussion yet. So maybe now's the time to start that. I'd like to just throw out a vague idea of a loose idea of a setback from residential zones for commercial cultivation of something like 1,000 or 2,000 feet. Now that would basically completely take care of your problem y'all are talking about, right? So that's kind of like my line of thinking, just to give you a picture, because we haven't gotten, like I said, we really only talked about it for a few minutes, the cultivation, but that's sort of the direction I'm thinking. And, you know, as a starting point, far away, that's what I mean by far away, not like 100 feet, but like a quarter mile at least, because I know about what you're talking about. I'm familiar with grows of that size. You know, I can smell them as I approach from 1,000 feet or more away easily. So I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly about what the appropriate locations for these things are and what aren't. So I hope that'll become more evident to the public as we talk about the details of cultivation.
So yeah, I thank you. That was a great segue into everything, Robert. Thank you. We're now crossing off number 1. We'll wait for the final document to read it and okay it and understand it, like Heidi suggested. And so now we're moving on to item number 2, which is cannabis cultivation in general and commercially, I guess, is what we're really talking about. So Jesse just brought up, 1,000 to 2,000 feet, or at least a quarter of a mile, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,320 feet. And let's start there, 1,320 as a minimum, or pick a number. What do y'all feel?
You know, the county staff, Heidi and I, have been hoping, at one point we were planning on this not being permitted in ag land at all. And so, before we worry about setbacks to residential property, what kind of zones are we even going to allow this in?
I think setbacks from residential property should apply regardless of zoning.
So right now, this is, I also sit on the California State Farm Bureau Board of Directors, and at this point, in my understanding, unless it's changed in the last month or two, cannabis in no way, shape, or form is an agricultural product yet. And I think that's being considered across the country, and I would guess it will change at some point, but at this point it is not. And so that's the weirdness of why we keep talking about it, right? And so I just heard Joel, on behalf of all county officials, say that they would like to not see it in the ag. That was a little facetious.
On behalf of Heidi and myself.
Okay. Oh, all right, we stand
But,
corrected.
these are things that we've discussed with the Board of Supervisors consistently for over a year, and it was always representations I made that this is not an agricultural product at the moment. And, we also, most of our ag land is coastal zone. It's not probably ideal circumstance. Anyway, there's a lot of reasons why we thought we weren't going to go that direction.
And on the coastal zone piece, that's already excluded, or cannabis is already excluded from that.
No.
It's not.
It's not. Oh,
Well, coastal zone versus coastal, whatever you call it, when the county's talking about their coastal district is different than the line that the coastal commission has jurisdiction over.
So the one I was
I
talking about
believe
is
that's what we're
coastal
talking
district.
about. But we're coastal weather is what we're talking about. Our ag zone is coastal weather, which is not that conducive.
So any ordinance that we pass that affects the coastal zone, land use in the coastal zone, will have to be approved by the coastal commission. We've got a little chart. 5 or 6 or 7 jurisdictions have gotten that far and tried with mixed results. The ones that the coastal commission has liked have insisted on no new greenhouses and things like that. We would want to be real conservative because it's quite a process. Or ban it in the coastal zone altogether was something that we were thinking earlier. But, cannabis is an agricultural use now in some contexts. For instance, the Williamson Act, the kind of deferred taxation situation for ag land, cannabis can, make use of that. I think throughout the Central Valley and the places where they're kind of jumping on board with this, they're treating it like an ag use. I think we still, at this point, are going to retain any kind of specific use permit control, regardless of kind of how that ends up being treated later. I think we're going to be able to do what we do and not have to worry too much about that. I would just say if this is kind of from a policy standpoint something we want in ag, then we need to talk about a lot of considerations there. But if it's not, we can kind of skip it and move on to PO and forest ag and TPZ and all the kind of timberland areas that we have been thinking of thus far.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest this. We've got about approximately 10 minutes left, and what I'd like to really do is just kind of narrow in the sub-subjects, underneath this concept that we really need to build our conversation around, and then that'll help form our agenda for next meeting. So y'all could help me do that right now. That was.
Do we want to talk a little bit about
How
the
do we wanna
zoning
break
question,
this
right?
down?
Do we want to have a quick conversation about the ag thing real quick? I spent a little time
Yeah,
looking at
go ahead.
zoning maps with Heidi, and there's not a lot of ag zone in the prime cannabis flower production zone. But that's not to say somebody couldn't have a successful business of some kind in an ag zone. There's nursery operations that are completely appropriate in an ag zone in terms of weather. Somebody who's good at running a high-tech greenhouse could produce cannabis flowers in a coastal area where the weather isn't good normally outside. So just the fact that that our ag zone is coastal weather doesn't mean it's not viable for business. So I think that there's some ag zone property that could be appropriate for some kinds of operations, and it'd be a shame to block it out forever. There's big parcels that have huge distances from, Blake's place would probably be great. there's a place where you could put a small greenhouse that's huge distance from any residential zone and it would work out. So I'd hate to exclude it automatically just because there's ag zone that's adjacent to residentials. I think we could have a pretty consistent setback from residential zones that applies everywhere to all zoning. And that would take care of a huge part of the problem without blocking out viable ag zones.
Yeah, I think I would weigh in with the thought that, you know, Joel's point of trying to simplify the process. We've done that in a number of instances in some of our other discussions. You know, maybe we should consider, I mean, if there is a lot of different details and a lot of different aspects of ag allowance for cannabis use that we need to discuss, maybe it's something we should be working after the fact. You know, it's kind of like some of the other things that we've done. If it's an easier prospect for us as a group to get forth good recommendations to the board, to just kind of try to focus on some of the TPZ, PO, and forest ag lands, maybe we should consider that, and maybe just table agricultural at this point. I mean, I would be for that, just for the simplification process for us, because it does appear as though that the ag is going to probably be, you know, something where we're going to have a lot of different discussions: coastal zone use, rural property, residential property abutments, things like that. So
I have no problem waiting as much as I'd like to see it eventually. Like all these things we've gone through, I don't have a problem with doing this a piece at a time as we know more. So.
Okay.
Hi, Angela Greeno, Delmar Unified School District Board Member. I also just want to remind you that there is a federal law that there can be no drug use, cultivation, and transportation, anything within 1,000 feet from a school. That does include, some of our schools are located near agricultural lands, Smith River, Redwood, so those do keep in mind that there are certain areas that you automatically have a setback of at least 1,000 feet away from a school. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
while we have you here, were you able to get the list of schools that we may have missed on our maps from the last meeting? Was that ever?
It was under my knowledge that Jeff had told staff to send that out.
Okay.
He also did not know this meeting was happening because he was told that county staff would tell him when it was happening. So I know you guys post it on Facebook. That's how I knew. So if you guys can also remind the school district when you are doing these meetings, I know that other governments are here too.
Jeff was in the room, we talked
yeah,
about it,
exactly.
he knew.
Right.
So he could look on Facebook just like everyone.
Right, I had to show him on Facebook as well.
No disrespect.
No, I had to show them on Facebook as well. So just to remind as well that there are other government agencies that are very interested in this topic. I will make sure to remind our staff to send that to county staff as well of the exactly school locations, the boundary lines, because as we said, not all our school sites have actual playgrounds and buildings. There are some other school-owned property that would have to be within that 1,000 feet as well.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to point one other thing out when we're talking about ag lands in general. Previous years and years and years of commercial cannabis production or black market cannabis production, the Yurok tribe has dealt extensively with this. There is a lot of pollution factor involved. There's chemicals and, you know, blocking of streams and all these issues. However, in the state regulations that all of these new grows or existing grows are going to have to now comply with, in my mind, all of that is gone. There are essentially no chemicals that can be used at all. There is extensive, checks and balances by all local and state officials to make sure you're not doing all these things. And the very one thing that we as a county should be the most concerned about is surface water use. And that's where in ag lands are zoned ag lands for the reason that they have very good access to non-surface water. They have wells and whatnot. A lot of the properties we're kind of talking about in the timberlands don't always have surface water use. They don't always have well water use. They use surface water, and that is where these farms can cause tremendous impact to our environment, and that is taking of the surface water, which you see in the Eel River and other rivers, where we're losing surface water, which keeps our rivers the proper temperature. And so that's the one thing where, when we're talking about excluding ag land, pushing things out of the ag zones, we're pushing things to where the use of massive amounts of water is inappropriate. And so we need to think closely about that.
I have to concur with what you're saying, because Kurt's right. The loss of water from our rivers and streams is having a really detrimental impact on salmon, steelhead, and other species. One place the regulations are not as well formulated is in the water use right now. The State Water Resources Control Board is still feeling their way towards how to manage water use and water permitting.
To disagree with that,
I would
definitely. That, no, just like with the other issues you brought up, Kurt, the days of the damage are done. There is no more surface water drafting, period. You can't draft between May and October. You can't even draft to storage between, it's earlier. They moved it back to April, all the way April to November. It's like 7 or 8 months of forbearance period. This is the last year where they've given, because they came up with a draft ordinance 2 years ago, not ordinance, I'm using the wrong terms, a draft order for their discharge 2 years ago, and then got a bunch of people in their compliance regulation, and they attempted to change it very drastically to implement this 7-8 month forbearance period, but they found out that they weren't able to do it that quickly, and so they allowed 1 more year. This is the final year of being able to draft to storage for cannabis permit purposes, and even the regulations there are very, very tight, and the water board permits are very tightly regulated. I have one, and they're it's unbelievable. The surface water drafting is done, and you have to have a permitted well in order to do it. So
that's good. You know, it's
good.
The only reason I'm pointing that out is because from a county standpoint, this is the one thing where the state regulations aren't going to protect us. The state regulations of growing cannabis aren't exactly going to protect the water, the surface water take. You can't put the chemical on it because you can't pass the test to sell the cannabis. You know, you can't do these things that have been done in the past because you can't pass that test. And so the water board, yeah, that's cool. That's what they should be doing. And so that'd be the one thing I think as a county we really want to look at, because if that regulation changed, let's say, and the water board allowed you to pull more water, well, the county should really think closely about that ability to do such. And so hauling of water is a thing, you know.
Or water either, that's not
No, you
legal.
can't. From a cultivation standpoint from cannabis, though, I will say I would guesstimate 80% of the farms that I've seen in multiple states and throughout this state, we're all using micro irrigation techniques. It's traditionally a well-respectable, community-minded, family-oriented cannabis farmer is probably more concerned with the environment that they live on than a lot of other people. From the people that I know. Now, I do know there are major black market illegal grow operations that you know bypass streams. They create dams in headwater areas. That's a concern. But when we're talking about commercialized, capitalized farms, we're all using micro irrigation techniques, and that's for many different reasons. I could get into 50 different reasons why micro irrigation is used in cannabis farming from a commercial standpoint. And one of the biggest reason is we don't want to waste water either. It's a big concern for everyone, particularly some of the farms that are established in watershed areas. And I'll just relay what Jesse says. I have a state water board permit for riparian use. I use it for irrigating my pasture. I also have a specific cannabis riparian water use. And the forbearance period is from April to the end of October every year. I can't store water. I can't take it from the surface. I can only store water enough to use from October to the beginning of April. And so that's another reason why we use micro irrigation. We're limited in the amount of water we can use. But I do agree that, that has been one of the larger environmental damages that cannabis has brought upon itself by allowing these large-scale operations as a community effort and the people who grow it, and just allowing this to happen.
So I have a question then for you, and this is just, so when you're using water in those periods where you're not allowed to store it, that's from surface or from well?
It's from stored water that you use during the unforbearance period. So you basically have to store
So you
water.
store it up,
You
and then you can
store
only
it up
use
and you
from
can
that
use
stored-
that. So as long as you.
Or
store
your
it
well, or a well.
Or a well.
Yeah.
And literally, the forbearance period, I mean, we do have significant amount of rainfall during the winter months, which, you know, if you have proper storage capacity, and that's where calculations of micro irrigation come into play. You know a lot about that, Kurt. You know, each plant uses a specific amount of water. You just have to calculate that out. And everybody who's going to get a license in a cultivation aspect is going to follow those P's and Q's.
Rainwater catchment's the other. reason.
Rainwater.
So just in that little, one of the things then we might think about, and this, of course, we're at noon, but could be potentially from county standpoint as to the size of which you could, size of storage tank for your water, which could be a natural limitation for farm size in such places. It could be an idea.
It could be. The only problem with that is, I mean, on hotter days, you know, it's hard to you know, say, okay, every single day this one plant only uses X amount, when maybe other days.
Okay, I'm going to stop this debate.
I'm going to interrupt. Garden scale is the way to limit that, not tank scale. Garden size, license size.
Again, I've only got 2 bullet points under this category at this point, and those are the setback concept and then the ag zone, and everything else seemed to have fallen under the ag zone. Am I missing something, or is there a 3rd bullet point that we might want to add to this?
Scale, license size. I want
Scale, all
to
right.
push toward the small license size, which naturally limits overuse of water.
Okay.
It naturally limits impacts to neighbors. It naturally limits
Okay.
the general scene.
Is there a 4th one? or-
Well, are we also talking indoor, outdoor? So you're talking greenhouse and outdoor?
You haven't gotten to indoor yet. Different category. We're talking outdoor right now.
No, just outdoor. This is all under the idea of outdoor. Okay? And then the only other thing, this is because I get the mic last, is that it's still my understanding that most of the production in California is black market. And we keep talking about, well, the rules and the regs and the State Water Quality Board and this rule and that is now in effect, and it wasn't in effect before. Well, I guess what I think has happened is we've had illegal growing, illegal black market, illegal everything, and it just got huge in this state. And what we're trying to do now is fix all the sins of that industry, if you will, and we're saying, well, that's covered here with this regulation and this one and this one, and yeah, that's fine if the grower is literally trying to be legitimate and have a legal license, and so just keeping all that in mind, we got to consider that, you know, we're dealing with a whole lot of folks that were absolutely willing to not follow the rules, and I'm not talking about anybody here locally or in our county. I'm just talking in general. This has been a very scary, ugly, wide open, you know, situation. So just bringing that back. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Church Tree group for weighing in.
Yeah.
Walk up and make it, please.
We go
The
right
meeting
in.
is going to be over here in just a second, so.
Blake,
next
can we
meeting.
also pick when the next meeting is going to be?
Yeah.
They've got
So-
the agenda items, so I can post those.
Patty, go ahead.
Patty McCauley, Rotary Coast Collective. I'd like to first give a standing ovation to Jesse for addressing injustice in the Board of Supervisors. And I would like to also point out that federally there is no laws concerning cannabis because they're against it. There are state regulations, they're just guidelines. Each county is allowed to make up their own guidelines. If we go by bus stops, we're going to have no place for safe access for medical patients or recreational patients. You can't compare Crescent City, with a population of 6,600, to Redding, California, who almost has 100,000 in their population. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Okay,
And you look
thank you.
great in your bow tie.
Thanks, Patty.
So next meeting, we've been running basically 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. So that puts us on the 27th. I'm in Sacramento and out of town. That doesn't mean that we can't have the meeting, but I'm just letting you all know. The next week is 4th of July, I'm wide open. Shucks. And the other option is next week, huh?
Everyone else make it on the 27th?
Okay, on the 27th, I think we need to call the board chamber, the clerk of the board to, is it available? Did
I
miss
don't
that?
know. Can we
Because
find out now?
I think we need to find out now because I
Okay.
know I have an item on it that could potentially be
Okay.
a workshop or something that's going to be in this chambers.
Okay.
Could be in the afternoon, but I can call and, I don't know if anyone's there right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not in a hurry. If we're willing to wait to find out if the board chambers are available on that date, we should. Because one time we scheduled it and then it was busy and we had to redo the whole thing,
Okay.
so.
We'll know in just a second.
And I'm not a problem with doing it next week either, or changing the day of the week if
Day of
that
the week
works.
Uh,
Next Tuesday is the board meeting, is the Board of
Yeah,
Supervisors,
the
so.
28th, I'm still out of town. 29th, Friday would be.
Wednesday is a great day.
Okay.
We can stay on
We'll
Wednesdays.
stick to Wednesday.
And then agenda items,
Yeah.
kind of just so I know what to post without,
The setback and the X zone and the size and scale.
okay. We haven't usually been that specific with the agenda items. It's like discuss outdoor. That's like might be specific enough.
Okay.
Cannabis cultivation, public comment, and adjournment. Three. It's not like if we're gonna get into that conversation, it's gonna take a while. We're gonna be specific with outdoor.
Yeah, let's do outdoor. Let's get setback and ag zone, just so that we know what we're talking about.
The 27th is available from 10 to noon.
Okay. Sounds like we will meet on the 27th. I will probably be out of town. Jesse will run the meeting. We're developing that agenda right now, which is to be continued. More of
Question
this.
before we all leave, when is the next Board of Supervisors meeting? It is the
26th.
26th. Will you be here for that, Blake?
No, I'm out of town all week, sorry.
Requests for you to be present during my presentation, so.
I would make,
Just so you know.
I would advocate that we do not make a presentation at the Board of Supervisors meeting unless Blake is there the next time. I am not,
Was that a specific
I'm-
request from Board of Supervisors?
No.
no, it was a specific
Roger
request from Roger
having
Gillen.
questions.
I don't think that's personally viable.
Well, he
That
didn't
doesn't sit
request
well
that
with me.
that the presentation not take place if Blake wasn't there, but he did request that Blake be available to answer questions.
And or expressed, at least in my opinion, some disappointment that Blake wasn't there.
Yeah, he wants Blake to talk about how
And
terrible this all is.
I've never actually been wanted before, but I appreciate the concern. I will make an effort to be there. However, I will be out of town that particular week, so I did not know.
So I don't know, maybe we shouldn't be making,
No, I don't think we should be disbanding our commitment to the board to give them an update. If there was one specific member of the board who's got a problem or a personal problem with a member of our committee or board and doesn't want to necessarily speak to them or hear from them without someone else present, I think that person needs to check themselves before they come into this door.
Can we ask
I mean, and I'm
Eric
live, I
to
don't
give the
care. I'm a
presentation?
public person who has a right to vote. in my
You wanna give the
opinion. It's just
presentation,
ridiculous.
Eric?
I would definitely agree to give the
Let's
presentation.
ask Eric to give the
Absolutely.
presentation
I have
at
no
the next.
problem with
You all
that.
right with that, Kurt? Eric does?
yeah, I'm good. I just wanted to point out that.
You have to ask him to do it.
When I watch
I'll do
these,
it.
when I watch the meeting, I'm seeing Jesse being personally attacked
Gotcha.
by at least one specific supervisor, and so I would be an advocate from this group's perspective that we at least make sure there's
Okay.
at least someone else and or a different person.
All right, so Eric, you're willing to do?
Absolutely, for
right.
that sake,
You'll
absolutely.
cover it.
I
All
mean,
right.
we should just show a concerted front here because I don't think we need
All
to
right.
be pushed around anymore.
And in the future, I will do my best. I'm out of town a lot, and that's kind of why I was really leaning on Jesse to give, or somebody else to give the reports. And so that's kind of what we're
I absolutely agree. I will do it.
And-
for
and
sure.
then there is
And no
the-
fireworks for me.
There is the,
Distribution you wanted to put on there, Bobby? We didn't really get into that. I mean, it's sort of it should go in with the processing and manufacturing. But do you want to put that on the agenda also? talk about distribution.
Well, we talked about it one time and Blake wasn't around.
Right.
And so I was just wanting to bring him more
Should we
up
put
to
that
date
on
on
the
the
agenda?
distribution.
Not for the meeting that I'm not at, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well then what are we gonna talk about in the next meeting? then,
Whatever you
besides
want to get
cultivation?
past without me there.
So at the next meeting, you know, let's put manufacturing on and we'll look at some maps. And then, let's just plan on cultivation taking up a lot of time.
On the manufacturing, you're gonna have some writing in it too, so it'll show what it looks like with the other part of the county?
Possible,
Okay.
it's possible.
So I'm going to do a little closing quickly, just to say goodbye, and I guess people are out there listening, but I am unaware of what happened at the board meeting yesterday. I just picked up a little bit sitting here. The reason I'm unaware is because I really do my best to stay out of town and not get involved in local politics. I'm on this committee by default, and I'm on this committee because I was really anti-marijuana, and you know, I would love to see our kids grow up in a county where we had an ordinance that just said, you know, we prefer not to have any of any kind, shape, or size, or form. That's my belief. That's where I come from, and so we have worked together. There was a lot of us at the original meeting, 19 people, and I seem to be, you know, standing over here alone with that stance. And you know, since then I've got company now, and since then, right, through this consensus concept that we're not working under party pro or parliamentary procedure, Robert's Rules of Order, where we're making motions and debating them and voting on them. We've been working through consensus with this concept that we're still all part of this community, and there's two sides represented, and we're trying to come together. And so what I'm here to say, and this is what I would say to the supervisors if I was there, is that I feel really comfortable that we've done a good job, that Jesse and that Kurt and that everybody on here has moved a little more towards the center, and including me. And so we've all compromised our original position, not necessarily our principles, but our original position, to come up with an ordinance that we believe can fit into our community, and we can continue to raise happy, healthy kids in this community. And so that's still where I'm at. That's still, I believe, where all of us are. And you know, when the rest of you aren't here in the room or wherever I am, I defend you. And you know, I think you've all made great strides in moving left or right. So that's how I'd like to end. Thank you all for coming, and meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.